The night was unusually quiet in the Carter mansion. Behind the high walls and golden gates lived Harold Carter, a self-made millionaire who had built his fortune from nothing. His empire was vast, his house enormous, but his heart carried a silent ache that no amount of wealth could ease. His only son, David, had never taken a step in his life. Since birth, David's legs were frail, weakened by a condition the best doctors in the world said had no cure. For years, Harold had spent millions seeking treatments, therapies, and surgeries, but every effort ended in disappointment. The boy, though bright and full of spirit, lived in a wheelchair, always watching other children run and play while he sat quietly on the side. Harold loved his son deeply, but guilt shadowed his love. He blamed himself for not being able to give David a normal childhood. His late wife had passed away when David was only 3, and the house that once echoed with laughter was now filled with silence. Harold worked day and night, building his businesses higher and higher, but each evening, when he came home to see his son's chair parked by the window, staring into the gardens where other children played, his heart sank. It was during this heavy time that the new maid arrived. Her name was Grace, a young black woman from a humble village who carried with her little more than hope and determination. She had applied for the job with no high references, no fancy background, and only the memory of her own younger brother, who once struggled with an illness, as her greatest experience. Harold had nearly turned her away, but something in her eyes, something steady and kind, made him give her a chance. Grace quickly became more than a maid. She was warm, compassionate, and full of gentle humor. Unlike the previous staff, she didn't see David as the boy in the wheelchair. She treated him as a child first, a person with dreams, jokes, and stories to tell. Slowly, David opened up to her. They played board games in the evenings, read books together under the sunlight streaming into the study, and shared secrets he had never even told his father. Grace became the friend David never had. One afternoon, Harold returned early from work and found the two of them in the garden. Grace was holding David's hands, helping him stand even though his legs trembled. At first, Harold rushed forward, afraid she might hurt him, but Grace stopped him with a calm smile. "He can do more than you think," she said softly. Harold stood there, stunned, as he watched his son take the tiniest of steps unsteady. Painful, but real. It was something the doctors had said was impossible. Tears welled up in Harold's eyes as David looked at him and whispered, "Dad, I'm walking." But the journey wasn't easy. Progress was slow. David would sometimes fall, sometimes cry in frustration. Harold often questioned if Grace was giving him false hope. Yet Grace never gave up. Each morning, she helped David try again, her patience endless, her faith unshakable. She told Harold stories of her brother, who everyone said would never recover, but who eventually stood tall because someone refused to stop believing in him. Weeks turned into months, and the impossible began to unfold. David could stand longer. He could take steps across the room. Grace would clap and cheer, her joy infectious. Harold found himself watching more often, sometimes joining in the exercises, sometimes simply holding his son's hand to give him strength. For the first time in years, Harold felt like he wasn't failing his son. For the first time, David felt like his life wasn't bound to a chair. The turning point came on a bright spring morning. Grace called Harold into the living room. His heart raced as he saw David, standing upright, sweat on his brow, determination burning in his eyes. "Come to me, son," Harold whispered, his voice breaking. Step by step, David walked across the room, each movement shaky but strong, until he fell into his father's arms. Harold wept openly, holding his boy tightly, overwhelmed by a miracle. He never thought he would see news of David's progress spread. Doctors couldn't explain it. Neighbors whispered about it. To Harold, it didn't matter what anyone said. All that mattered was that his son, once told he would never walk, was now chasing him in the garden, laughing with joy. The mansion that once felt cold now rang with laughter again. Harold knew deep inside that this miracle wasn't bought with his millions. It came from Grace, the maid who had walked into their lives with nothing but faith and love. She had done what medicine, money, and experts could not. She had given his son hope, courage, and freedom. Over time, Harold's respect for Grace grew into deep gratitude. He gave her more than a salary, he gave her a place in their family. She was no longer just a maid, but a guardian angel who had changed their lives forever. And as the years went by, whenever Harold looked at his son running through the halls or playing in the yard, he silently thanked the young woman who had worked a miracle not with riches, but with patience, belief, and love. Sometimes in life, miracles do not come wrapped in science or wealth. They come through people who believe in us when the world has already given up. For years, Harold thought his millions could buy solutions. But what his son needed was not money, it was love, patience, and faith. Grace, the black maid who stepped into their lives with nothing more than kindness in her heart, gave David what no doctor or treatment could. She gave him courage to stand, strength to try, and hope to never give up. In the quiet moments, when David fell and cried, she lifted him up. When Harold doubted, she reminded him that faith can be stronger than fear. And when the day finally came that David walked across the room, it was not just his legs that were freed, it was Harold's heart, freed from years of guilt and sorrow. This story reminds us that true wealth is not measured by money, but by the lives we touch and the hope we give. The millionaire thought he had everything, but only when Grace arrived did he discover the greatest treasure of all, seeing his son live freely, laughing and running like every child deserves. So as you hear this story, remember, never underestimate the power of belief. Sometimes, the smallest acts of love can create the biggest miracles. Grace was hired as a maid, but she became a healer, a teacher, and an angel in disguise. And maybe that's the lesson for all of us. No matter who we are, no matter where we come from, we each have the power to bring light into someone else's life, and when we do, we create miracles that no wealth in the world can ever buy.